Hello, Kendra Kunov here, and I am going to talk about Fierce Grace and wanted to respond to some questions about that. But this is also a live Q&A session, so if you have a question about something that I'm saying, or you just have another question that you already would like me to answer, though it's not related, please post it in the comments, and we'll see where I get to in this, probably about 20 minutes, something like that. So let's get started. So again, my name is Kendra Kunov, and one of the pieces that I want to talk about today is Fierce Grace. And I want to talk about it in two ways. One is, yes, it's a women's program that I'm launching and running, and so I'll be speaking to that. But the other is like, why Fierce Grace? Why the program itself? Why is it called that? What are the elements? Why does it matter? So again, I'm going to start talking about Fierce Grace. If you have any questions about anything I'm saying, or you just have another question you'd like to ask me, feel free to put it in the comments, and I will get to as much as I can. So, why Fierce Grace? There's a few ways that I could answer that. And on one level, my personal experience is that there is a deep magic and value in what I would call women's practice. So some of the pieces I'll speak to are more around what Fierce Grace means to me, but in the realm of why am I even putting together a women's program called Fierce Grace, is that there is a deep magic and value in my experience when we do what I would call women's practice. So first I want to distinguish between what I call women's practice and what I would call feminine practice. So there are times when I teach groups of women and we are women doing fundamentally feminine practice in my masculine and feminine delineation. And in Fierce Grace, intentionally, one of the things I really care about that matters to me that I want to bring in is women's practice that includes what I would call feminine practice and what I would call masculine practice. Hi, Jen. Thank you. It's always nice to get a little wave there. So for me, that has a lot to do, and occasionally I'm looking down because there's what goes on here. Hi, Lisa. And there were a couple things that I knew I wanted to touch on, so I took a few notes. To me, this question, Fierce Grace in a way, is my response to the question, what does it mean to live as a woman embodying her wholeness in this day and age, in this particular world that we live in? And what does that take? What does it really take from us as women to live what I would call embodied wholeness? And that's one of the reasons that I really want to work with a group of women specifically in both masculine and feminine practice. Personally, I do both on a regular basis. I have very consistent feminine practice that I do. I wrote a little bit about it the other day when I did a dance practice for probably a good hour. I don't always practice for that long, but I had just been teaching and I needed to express it all out and just spread it all out. So I did an hour-long practice that was completely dedicated to pleasure and expression. So in my vernacular, some of the basis of what makes something feminine practice is that it has to do with pleasure in the body and expressing through the body. So that was a feminine practice. I have regular practices that are around especially pleasure and then expression. But I also have daily, absolutely daily, what I would call masculine practice. They're grounding for me. They are frankly what allows my life as a very expressive and full of energy woman with 2 small children and a full, client and teaching load. It's what allows my life to work. Like, I get questions a lot like, how do you get, I literally get asked, how do you get so much done? How are you the mom of 2 and have like this full career? How do you stay present to your own voice in the midst of all that's going on? And for me, this is what, fierce grace is the answer. And it really, for me, has to do with having regular practice, both in the realm of feeling and expressing through my feminine body, and holding and grounding, witnessing through my masculine body, if you will. These are taking these very kind of esoteric pieces and trying to put words to them. And it's the other reason that for me this has to do with practice, because it happens in the actual embodiment of it. So I believe that in one sense, I believe that there is no binary, and we are all one, and we are all of it, and we are all none of it. I also believe that we are inherently existing in a world that has dualities, that has polarities, that has paradoxes. And we live in a world in which we get born into bodies. I don't know why. I don't know, I don't think that needs to limit us. I don't believe that needs to limit us. I do believe we need to honor it. So whether, for instance, I am someone who identifies as a woman, I'm also born into a body that is a woman's body, that's a female body. But it's the same, I would say. The process is very different, but the process of honoring, for instance, if you were born into a female body but want to be in a man's body, we have to honor that. There's something about the body that matters, and that's where this practice comes in. It's where embodied practice comes in. And so for me, thanks, Alice. My hair. This is, for me, my hair is it means something and it means nothing. What I say to people all the time is it's only hair. I feel the same way about, our lives. It's only life. We have to honor what we came in with. Again, whether that doesn't mean we have to be resigned to it, but we have to honor what we came in with. So fierce grace is for humans who identify as women, because there is something about those of us who move through the world as women coming together and practicing together that I believe matters. When we move through the world as a woman, we have a different experience than when we move through the world as a man. Men, anyway, I'm actually not even going to go down that rabbit hole right now. But women, there's something that it takes to live in this world in what I would call wholeness. And I want to differentiate a little bit between what I'm calling wholeness and what might be considered more like neutrality. So for one, there is this place of okay, I am a woman moving through this world, and then, which inherently differentiates me from someone who identifies as a man, or frankly someone who doesn't identify as either, or who identifies as both. So this is not meant to be so much limiting, but that there's a value in differentiating. Sometimes, at least. And so wholeness to me is that ability. Yeah, Lisa, I love it too. Like wholeness, really in the sense of having access to our whole, all of it. I was writing down, and this is in no means meant to be exhaustive, but to give that space, you know, like I'm a crazy bitch. I'm jealous. Like I'm a loving mother. I am fierce. I'm also graceful. I'm ambitious. I'm lazy. I have a lot of stillness. I also have a lot of movement. I'm both shallow and deep. I'm image conscious. I'm authentic. I'm, you know, is like, can I actually own and from you could call it owning, you could call it accepting, but from that place where I hold all of me, am I then willing to express all of me in the way that frankly might not always feel good to me, but can I accept or own, hold all of me, and then express all of me in the way that is needed from the world, for lack of a better word. The way that is, thanks Stephanie, the way that is being called for, the way that is, it's being called for from the world. Sometimes like it feels like it's what's being called for from whatever it is that called me into existence. That rather than staying as consciousness in the oneness and nothingness of it all, actually called me into embodied existence. Jen says, I'm finally, after being in my masculine expression for nearly 50 years, falling in love with being a woman. Absolutely. Actually, this is a beautiful piece you just brought in, Jen, which is many of us we've had a preference based on all kinds of factors in our life. And the other piece that I think often isn't really brought in, and that for me, fierce grace actually calls in, is like, how do we call in what I would call the healthy, the mature, the integrated, and the sacred forms of these expressions? So I don't even consider it just masculine and just feminine, but each of those has inside of it what I would call a more immature, a younger part, and what is a more mature or an integrated part, all the way to what I would call a sacred expression of those parts. So many of us, when we, as women, especially when we're like, oh, I spent so much time in my masculine, and now I only want to be in my feminine, which I'm certainly not putting words in your mouth, Jen. I don't think you're saying that, but I hear that a lot. And what I find is often true, if I get underneath that, is I've spent so much time expressing my immature masculine, the part that has to push and control and close, push away, dominate, that part. I've spent so much time expressing that. I'm afraid actually of, or I'm afraid that there is no other masculine expression. So first, I want to acknowledge, like Jen says, that there's a part where often, especially as women, if we've spent a lot of time expressing our masculine or embodying our masculine, even if it has been in the more healthy or integrated parts, but we've actually rejected our feminine, that there's beautiful and deep practice of both accepting and falling in love with, and then pressing our, being willing to express our feminine, and that there's also often a place where we can find, oh, this is where my healthy masculine and my healthy feminine they're not at odds with each other at all. That they truly and deeply, my masculine, for instance, actually holds space for my feminine and creates experiences for her. My masculine loves my feminine loves my masculine, and they nourish and support and weave with each other. So yeah, exactly, Jen. I didn't want to put words in your mouth. It was that your comment reminded me of this piece that I hear quite often from many, many women. So that is, again, this like, why fierce grace, or what is it? That has a lot to do with finding both the practices and the expressions of the more healthy, the more integrated, all the way to the sacred masculine and feminine within ourselves as women, that truly support and nourish us for the health and for the depth, the fullness of expression of like our whole lives. Because I find that my masculine practice is a lot of what gives me the capacity to offer my life in the way that I do, to hold my life in the way that I do. And without my feminine practice and my feminine expression, there would be an enormous loss to what it is that I feel and express and offer into the world as well. So they both have these really deep and beautiful and important pieces in my life. And that's this piece of what I want to offer for so many women who really haven't had the experience of where both can live and exist and dance. Exactly, Stephanie, the dance between the two. And then I think right before I went on this tangent, I was going to speak to the way that I experience wholeness as distinct from neutrality. So the other place that I see a lot in both men and women, but I'm going to speak to women here, but is when women come to a place of wanting to express both masculine and feminine and explore and nourish and love those parts in themselves, there's often a place that becomes more neutral and is like, I should be both in equal parts all the time. And it's not to say that there's never a point where it's valuable to hold equal parts. But often what is more true, I would say, to the deepest parts of ourselves is that a stronger expression, or the ability to pull on and express the fullness of our masculine or the fullness of our feminine in any moment, is actually more true, more nourishing, and more deeply of service to the world than the equal and neutral expression of the masculine and the feminine. Now, that is not true for all people, and it's not true all the time. But the vast majority of people that I come in contact with, for most of the parts of their lives, when there is this space to pull on really like a wild and full feminine and a deep and full masculine, and not be afraid to go to the wild extremes of either one, is where I find people become the most fulfilled and really alive. It's where I see the most aliveness in people. It's where I experience the most aliveness in myself. So I'm going to pause for a minute here. I love that, Julia, calling upon what you need to create balance at that time. And the only thing for myself, and I actually did I can't remember if it was a live or just a video, but for me, I find that balance basically never exists. Maybe that's just my life, but I see this in a lot of people that there's sort of not really a yearning, but this search for balance, and and I find more that it has to do with the flow and like, what does the moment call for? The moment rarely calls for balance, but it does call for unique pieces, exactly like you're saying, call upon what you need to create what's needed. So there might be moments in which balance is needed, but a lot of times moments call for like a very firm and intense container, or moments call for a wild and fluid moment. And so speaking to that piece of, yeah, calling upon what you need to create what, not only what you want, but what will serve in that moment. So I think the piece that I want to leave here, and leave then this for a longer conversation in another video, is the way that having access to all these parts, actually loving these parts, finding the fluidity between all of the parts of ourselves, it creates what I call resilience. And I had a conversation with one of my mentors the other day where he was talking about the term anti-fragile. And I'm not quite sure, I haven't quite landed in this term anti-fragile yet. But I had somebody ask me a while back, how can I stay so vulnerable without getting hurt? And first I just want to say, I do get hurt. So there's absolutely, for me on my personal path, and for my encouragement to you, is not to try to get to a place where you don't get hurt. But I think what people see from the outside is what I would call my resilience. And it really comes from what I have spoken to in this video, which is about the willingness to hold all those parts of myself and love them all, and use them to support myself and offer them to the world, and not get stuck in any one part of myself as the truth or as something static. It is what I would say, when I announced that I was doing this Facebook Live with the title sort of, what is Fierce Grace? A friend of mine posted, "You are Fierce Grace." And, first of all, it's a beautiful reflection. But I believe that in whatever way I embody Fierce Grace, in whatever way I'm able to transmit that or offer that, that's the place where our resilience is built. It comes from our willingness to be both fierce and graceful. I use the words masculine and feminine. If you have words that you like better, by all means, use those. But it comes from our willingness and our ability to embrace all of that. And it doesn't mean that we don't feel life, that we're not hurt, that we're not scared, or tender, or all these different pieces, not, jealous. It means that none of that has the capacity to knock us down for long. So I want to pause here and take that exploration into another video so I can give it more time. But again, I hope that this has been valuable for you. This is my first piece of exploration around answering the question, either, why Fierce Grace or what is Fierce Grace, both within myself, how I hold it, how I practice it, and also what that means as an actual program that I'm offering. What is Fierce Grace? It includes all of this. So sending all my love. Please continue to bring your questions, your comments, your reflections to the comments section, and I'll come back and continue to engage with you there. Sending you lots of love, and ciao.